This is going to be a long one, and it goes quite deep into the rabbit hole. So be prepared, strap yourselves down, and we're going to have to give you a bit of background on things. Now, I'm going to be talking about some fairly deep stuff in the role-playing game community. There is a conflict. Some of you will be familiar with a lot of the ideas and the terms that go around in this conflict through Gamergate and others. I mean the actual Gamergate, not the one you may have been told about. There is a conflict between the social justice crowd and people who don't necessarily go along with that, who perhaps prioritize free expression or the rights of the creator and so on over and above the impetus for diversity or whatever else. Many of them agree on these terms, these ideas, that we need more and different and all the rest of it. They just disagree with the way in which it's gone about, which has involved things like corruption, censorship, all that kind of thing. So in the tabletop gaming community, this has been going on longer than it has in the computer games community. And it is broadly divided into two camps. Now, these aren't contiguous in any way, really. It's just that this is a tendency, a correlation. So on one hand, you have the indie games, and that used to mean independent games produced by producers, games produced independently. That's really all it meant. People selling outside the purview of large companies, to the extent that these ever existed in the role-playing community. But it came to take on another meaning, just as it has in computer games, just as it did in music. Indie came to mean that kind of bohemian, alternative look at things. In tabletop gaming, that broadly became the story games movement, which was more about narrative and social issues and all the rest of it. Not that other games never tackled this kind of thing. I mean, social issues has always been a big thing in fantasy and science fiction and so on, and that's the same kind of things that games always covered. But here it was much more explicit, and it was part of the politics of the people making the games. You know, they wanted to make games that specifically appealed to, I don't know, the queer community or marginalized communities and so on. And they sold themselves on the idea that there was this great mass of people who would just get into games if only we appealed to them. That didn't necessarily work out like that. And this was all well and good. On the other hand, you had the mainstream community, which was less into this, and another independent community, the old school Renaissance, which was all about going back to the original roots of D&D, the improvisation, keeping things simple, that degree of nostalgia and so on. But they had a very different kind of outlook. So, on the one hand, you've got this ideological mass of people creating small independent games that they think are going to change the world. And on the other hand, you've got people who are just into games. The games, a lot of them were into the particular aesthetics, like heavy metal and so on, really kind of pushing boundaries in different ways, in shock and horror and subject matter and so on. It was much more that kind of side. So inevitably you're going to get a conflict. But from where I'm looking, the conflict has all come one way. The socially conscious indie crowd want to take their ideas and project them and force them onto other people. And inevitably this is going to create conflict and disagreement. Now, this whole thing has obviously affected me personally, because despite being progressive, I prioritize creators' rights, I prioritize free expression, I fight for the rights of people I don't agree with. But this has made me a target. And being sex positive and other things as well. This has repeatedly made me a target for this kind of ideological group. But I'm far from the only one. I don't particularly want to make this about me. Other creators like James Raggi, who made Lamentations of the Flame Princess, people like Zach Smith, who's worked with Raggi a lot, has recently put a children's book out with China Mayville, which I'll need to check out. It was the D&D with Porn Stars guy, and has done a lot for gaming. He's been a target. RPG Pundit as well. He's a bit of a dick, but still, these other people have been targets for this kind of, harassment. There's no other way to put it. And it's mostly one-sided. But that's where we are. They're trying to project their values and force their values onto other people, and they will hurl insults and accusations. They will try to get products taken down. They will try to create policies at conventions and so on that harm people who don't agree with their points of view. And so it goes, and so it goes, and so it goes. And this conflict has, in many ways, focused around Zach Smith and certain elements of this progressive element, because they repeatedly attack him, and unlike a lot of people, he fights back with equal viciousness. So that's kind of the background. Now, what's sparking this video log is a blog post by Mark Diaz-Truman, who works with Magpie Games. Now, I've talked with Mark before. He is a genuine idealist, but he's open to talking to other people and communicating with them. He did an interview with me, which got him a lot of flack in the past. So I'm not that surprised that this blog post that he put up has caused such a problem and such a reaction. And this took place at the end of last month. It's taken me this long to get around to really properly addressing it. So what Mark did is he put up this blog post, and he basically had some self-reflection in it. And he said, okay, us in the progressive community, we're not living up to our standards. We're not doing what we say we want to do. You know, we're not upholding our own end of this bargain, and we're engaging in horrible, nasty behavior in the harassment of Zach Smith and his friends and so on. Maybe we should stop and have a think about this and not do this. Maybe we should do better. And that's basically the thrust of this blog post. And it went about as well as can be expected. I'm not going to read the whole blog post. I'm just going to touch on some of the things that are in it. And okay, here's my biases. I like Mark in spite of his positions, which I disagree with. Well, it's not his positions I disagree with, it's the tactics and some of the attitudes. But I like him. You know, he reached out and talked to me. He has always made an effort to bridge build and get the other point of view and so on. So I like him. I like Zach, even though he's got me blocked for God knows what reason. I think it's because I'm peripheral to the men's rights thing, and he doesn't like that for some reason. So I like Zach. I think he's done huge amounts for the gaming community. I like the people he hangs around with. I like him. He's a bit fierce, but I like that about him. So, you know, I like the two kind of main reference points brought up throughout this blog post, which I will, of course, link below. So what seems to have sparked this is some particular nastiness directed towards Zach Smith by a friend of Mark's. And when he attempted to call it out, all he got was a bunch of justifications and excuses for behaviour that they wouldn't tolerate in reverse. And this seems to have sparked some self-reflection in Mark, which is to be admired, I suppose. It's apparent in the post that Mark thinks of himself as part of this indie community, this progressive community, because they believe that everybody deserves respect, and because they preach values of tolerance and inclusion and all the rest of it. And what's causing this problem for him is that he doesn't feel that this community is living up to it. Now, I can't help but reference personal experience here because it's relevant. I certainly don't feel respected. I don't feel that my rights or my values or my ideas are being tolerated by this community, and I'm not really the person who's had it worst. Zach has had it much worse than me. Other people have had it much worse than me. From these people who are preaching things 180 degrees from the way that they actually act. And Mark picking up on this and calling it out is a big deal. It's interesting. It's a sign of self-awareness that seems to be pricking at the edges of the social justice community more recently, and I hope this continues to happen and that more people like Mark reach out. But this seems to this particular incident of this nastiness and the excuses and so on for it seem to have pricked his conscience in a way that other things haven't. And so he seems to have examined other instances and gone back over them and thought about them in this new context, and that's good. He reels off a bunch of incidents that aren't going to mean much to many people, but they are fairly significant. Some of them were fairly serious, and most of them were pretty kind of churlish and petty and childish in the way we've come to expect, I guess, sadly, from people on that kind of side of things. That's unfortunate, but that's the way it is. But where he really gets to the crux of the matter, I think, is one particular sentence in the whole blog where he acknowledges that we think we're the heroes of this story, but for them, we're the villains. And that's true vice versa. It was true of Gamergate. It has been true of lots of others. Yeah, when it comes to these conflicts, I regard myself as obviously as the hero of the story that I'm in, which is a struggle for free expression, a struggle to express sexuality in games, to deal with difficult issues without softballing it, you know? And I regard them as villains because they're trying to choke off and constrict free expression. They are trying to impose their will on others, to ban products. You know, I just recently had Hentacle taken down because of a malicious complaint. You know, you don't see that kind of thing generally going on in the other direction. Maybe it has a couple of times, but it's nowhere like as much. So we have a set of clashing principles, I guess, but only one of them takes away from somebody else. Only one of them actually causes harm and damage. Now, so I can't quite grok how they think of themselves as heroes when they do this stuff, but it's apparent that they do. I just can't quite see how they justify it. I suppose they feel that the ends justifies the means, but in my story, they're definitely the villains, and I know that they see me as a villain, and I know that they see Zach as a villain, and I know that they see RPG Pundit as a villain, and James Raggy, and Avenger Satanus, and various others. To them, we're the villains, but to us, they're the villains. Now that's important. I think that's an important key point to understand, that we're both sides see themselves as heroes, both sides see the other side as villains. But I think once you start kind of delving down into things, there is room for accommodation and understanding between the two camps, except for some extremists. Now, the reference to the 2 Minutes Hate, that's obviously a reference to 1984, George Orwell's most influential book, in which the government organises people into groups to shout and rant and hate a figure, usually Emmanuel Goldstein, on the screen, and sort of get out their anger and so on. And for a lot of people, particularly in the social justice community, people like me, people like Zach, people like Pundit, people like Raggy, and so on, have become targets of this 2 Minutes Hate, except it never stops. You know, social media is 24 hours a day. People are constantly looking for something to be outraged or upset about, and so it goes. That's where we end up. And that's something that I think people are slowly starting to adapt to. The fact that social media has this effect, learning to cope with it. I mean, those of us who go back a ways on the internet, back to the early days, you know, we know how to handle trolling and so on. But genuine, actual abuse, people going after your jobs, people smashing your reputation, so on, that's different to trolling, and there's a lot of that goes on as well. But it's important to acknowledge this phenomenon, I think. And again, I think this is mostly a one-way thing, without that much justification. Going the other way, there's more justification because there's a genuine threat to people. What was particularly refreshing to see was Mark calling out the hypocrisy of his own community. You know, they talk up a storm about diversity, but then unless someone is completely on board entirely with their orthodoxy, they don't support them. They may talk about diversity and representation and so on, but they don't hire people to work on books that represent that diversity and so on. You know, this is their concern, this is what their supposed aim is, and yet they're not living up to it. And this goes on for thing after thing after thing. They do not live up to their own standards, and yet they try to project them onto other people and make them live up to their standards. It's not fair, it's hypocritical. And why should someone with different standards live up to your standards? It doesn't make any sense. So he rightly calls out various people for not living out, being the standards that they claim to profess. So yeah, that was very refreshing to see. You know, get your own house in order first, and if you're not doing that, can you really be said to be standing up for these principles? He also points out that a lot of people in the OSR and other sort of non-SOC just indie community have probably been more accepting and have produced more diverse works than they have, intellectually, but also in terms of hiring, and so on. There are a lot of LGBT people, minorities and so on, outside the Soccer sphere who are just kind of getting on with it, making games, making art and so on. I don't particularly make any kind of effort to hire diverse people, but I have worked with a lot of women. I've worked with trans people without even trying. Minorities is a bit more difficult, but I'm not neither seeking them out nor barring them from work. I generally put out open calls, and whoever fits the bill gets the job. Quite often when I put out open calls, I look for people who need the money. That's the criterion on which I maybe look for people. Who needs the work, who needs the help, who can I help by giving work to. That's, I guess, as a hoary old socialist, redistributing wealth in that way is kind of my hiring policy. And I'm not trying, and many of these other people aren't trying to be diverse or whatever, but they're succeeding better than a lot of these social justice indie communities. So what does that tell you, and why isn't it being supported? And he rightly points to Zach's gaming group and that as an example of the kind of diversity that they should be celebrating, but they're not. They're attacking it because he doesn't go 100% along with their orthodoxy. So, what's going on there? They're fighting for something that already exists and attacking that thing where it exists. What sense does that make? Just because they disagree ideologically? Well, where's the ideological and intellectual diversity? That's far more important, I think, than melanin or where you like to put your genitals, isn't it? Another thing I really liked about Mark's post is it's not just whining. He makes calls to action. He says, listen. He says, apologise. And he says, collaborate. My door has always been open to talk to people. That's why I did the interview with Mark back in the day. I'm always open to talking with people, because I tend to think that if I talk to people, then a lot of the misunderstandings about what I think, what I believe, why I do what I do will melt away. And if not, at least people will be hating me for things that I've actually done and positions I actually hold and things I actually believe, rather than hearsay and rumour. So if anyone wants to take Mark up on that and talk to me and listen to me, then reach out. Apologise. I would love some apologies. I don't think I owe anyone an apology. If anyone feels that I do, that I haven't already given anyway, then feel free to ask for one. And collaborate. This is something I tried back in the day, working with Tracy Hurley on a couple of game modules and things. I've tried. I even reached out to David Hill and his wife, and she wrote something for me for a book. I've tried. I have tried to reach out and collaborate in the hopes of creating understanding, but it didn't work. But if anyone wants to try again, my door is always open. Can anyone guess what the reaction to Mark's self-reflection, appeals to his community, and so on was? Can anyone guess? I'll give you a sec. I think most of you already know how this would have gone. If you said badly, well done. You're right. It went very badly indeed. Lots of people seem to think he was excusing Zach's behaviour, whatever that was. I've never seen Zach go after anybody that didn't come after him or his first. I've only ever seen him give as good as he got. I've never seen him go out of his way to attack somebody who hadn't first attacked him. But still, everyone seemed to react to this as if it was excusing Zach's bad behaviour, as if there was nothing to self-reflect about, as if there was nothing to be concerned about, nothing to worry about, that Mark was just off the rails and wrong and bad, and now he's got so much hate that there's threats of boycott, people refusing to work with him, and all the rest of it, all for trying to bridge build. And solve some of these problems, and all he got was hate. Unfortunately, that's not surprising, and I hope that this event, this revelation, this reaction to him attempting to reach out and build bridges and repair fences and all the rest of it, I hope it bears fruit. But looking at the reaction to him and the way he's been treated, I don't hold out much hope. But like I said before, my door is always open. If anyone wants to discuss with me, if anyone wants to work with me, then they're welcome to. I try not to let, even the way people have treated me, like Paizo or Evil Hat, I try not to let that determine what games and stuff I buy. I try not to let it get in the way of anything. I would be nice to see that attitude reciprocated. So, open hand, reach out and take it. Mark, I'd love to talk with you again about this. Maybe reverse the interview positions. I'd like to talk with you more about this. But I don't think there can be peace until your camp leaves the rest of us the fuck alone, stops trying to censor and control us, and just concentrates on doing their own thing. If you want to change things, be that change. Make the games you want to see. Work with the kinds of people you think you should be working with. The same thing you said, really. Be the exemplar of how you want things to work, but leave the rest of us alone. Many of us just have different priorities, and that's really the only difference. Well, here's hoping, and I hope someone takes me up on the offer. Bye-bye, guys. If you like what I do here, please like, subscribe. You can find me on social media, on Twitter at Grimachu, James Desborough on Facebook, James Grim Desborough on G+. My main website is postmortemstudios.wordpress.com. If you want to help me out with a little money, which will go to support my games, writing and other projects, you can do so at Patreon, which is also Grimachu.